Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who lived in the village of the forest. Whenever she went out, the little girl wore her red riding cloak, so everyone in the village called her Little Red Riding Hood. One morning, Little Red Riding Hood asked her mother if she could go visit her grandmother, as it had been a while since they had seen each other. "That's a good idea," her mother said. So they packed a nice basket for Little Red Riding Hood to take to her grandmother. When the basket was ready, the little girl put on her red cloak and kissed her mother goodbye. At the same time Little Red Riding Hood set on her journey, a young wolf had been exiled from his pack. All wolves were born with a natural killer instinct, but this young wolf had an abnormal lack of impulse control. He would constantly bite everything in sight, including his own friends and family. In the moment, his biting caused him to feel relieved and relaxed, but once he realized what he had done, he would feel extreme guilt. In addition to his biting, he would have severe temper tantrums over minor inconveniences. His pack grew tired of his out of control behavior and decided to exile him from the pack. The wolf thought to himself, "If only I could resist these impulses, but it is impossible." And so the wolf left the pack defeated. The wolf spent his free time destroying the forest and biting whatever he could get his paws on. He felt guilty after doing these destructive acts, but he was convinced he would not and could not get better. During one of the wolf's rampages, he noticed Little Red Riding Hood picking flowers and had an impulse to follow her. Little Red Riding Hood was enjoying the warm summer day so much that she didn't notice the dark shadow approaching out of the forest behind her. Suddenly, the wolf appeared beside her. "What are you doing out here, little girl?" the wolf asked in a voice as friendly as he could muster. "I'm on my way to see Grandma, who lives through the forest near the brook," Little Red Riding Hood replied. Then she realized how late she was and quickly excused herself, rushing down the path to her grandma's house. Upon hearing this, the wolf had an overwhelming urge to go disrupt the grandma's house, and so the wolf took the shortcut while Little Red Riding Hood made her way through the forest. The wolf, a little out of breath from running, arrived at Grandma's and knocked loudly at the door. At this point, the wolf thought to himself, "Maybe I shouldn't mess with strangers' lives." But before he could act on his thought, Grandma swung open the door and said, "Oh, thank goodness, dear. Come in, come in. I was worried sick that something happened to you in the forest," thinking the knock was her granddaughter. The wolf let himself in, and before he realized, he had gobbled up poor Granny. The wolf let out a satisfied burp, but quickly then came to his senses and realized that Little Red Riding Hood was on her way. Panicked, the wolf poked through Granny's wardrobe and found a nightgown and frilly sleeping cap to hide his pointy ears. A few minutes later, Red Riding Hood knocked on the door. The wolf jumped into bed and pulled the covers to his nose. "Who is it?" he called in a crackly voice. "It's me, Little Red Riding Hood." Little Red Riding Hood entered the little cottage and immediately realized that the person in the bed was not her grandmother, but the wolf from earlier. She ran across the room and through that door, shouting, "Help, wolf!" as loudly as she could. A woodsman who was chopping logs nearby heard her cry and ran towards the cottage as fast as he could. He grabbed the wolf and made him spit out poor grandmother. Embarrassed by the whole situation, the wolf apologized profusely and explained that he hadn't mean any harm, but acted violently by instinct. Having lived in the forest for a long time, Granny realized that the wolf had intermediate explosive disorder, a disorder characterized by the recurrent violent outbursts. The wolf felt relieved to know that he wasn't crazy but actually suffering from a disorder. Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother sympathized with the wolf and decided to help him get better. They explained to the wolf that changing his maladaptive thinking was the first step of getting better. He needed to recognize that his disease was not incurable, but it was up to him to get better. Granny then talked with the wolf and discovered that as a pup he had been temporarily captured by huntsmen who verbally berated him. In addition, the wolf mentioned that his uncle had also been exiled from the pack from aggressive behavior. Granny concluded that the wolf had a genetic predisposition for intermediate explosive disorder that was triggered by his childhood abuse. Granny began to teach the wolf coping methods for his anxiety in order to reduce his violent outbursts. In addition to his new coping methods, Granny gave him a potion that made of flowers called fluoxetine to help regulate his mood and anxiety. After being in the care of Granny for months, the wolf decided that he was now able to rejoin his pack. His pack accepted him and raised awareness for this disorder. The wolf visited Granny every once in a while and was able to live happily ever after.